Howdy y'all! I'm Rissy and I review things. Today, I'm going to be reviewing books while I put on makeup. That's right, it's another book review, get ready with me. Today, I'm going to be reviewing N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth Trilogy. Those books are The Fifth Season, The Obelisk Gate, and The Stone Sky. I'm gonna keep spoilers down to an absolute minimum, just light spoilers, I would say, mostly for the first book, and I completely avoid spoiling anything in the third book. This trilogy famously won a Hugo for every single book in it, right in a row, but do they live up to the hype? Well, let's find out. But first, I must have a bare face, so here we go. Woo! Here I am. No makeup. You guys know the drill. I'm gonna be putting it on and talking about books. And yeah, there goes my last ties to decent vision. So like I said in the intro, I'm gonna try and avoid spoilers for anything other than the first book and the very beginning of the second book. If you really, really hate spoilers, because I know you guys are out there. I don't mind spoilers myself. So, overview, these books are fucking awesome and all the hype is real. Just gonna do that right out of the gate the same way I did last time. In the science fiction and fantasy world, the Hugo for Best Novel is like Best Picture in the Oscars. It's a big freaking deal. Each of these books more than deserved it. They are all so freaking good. I would call them instant classics and not in a mocking way, the way I did with the Kingkiller Chronicles. They are very different from anything that had come before them, really, but also very familiar in certain ways. They do take a lot of fantasy and science fiction tropes and actually play with them. This review is going to focus a lot on compare and contrast between the last book review that I did and this one. There's a lot of things that are actually the same about these two book series, but Jemisin shows how to do it right and not how to fuck it up. In these books, you have a protagonist who comes from very unlikely circumstances and loses her family, spoilers for the first book, has to go to a special school to learn magic, quickly makes a couple of enemies there. Over the course of the books, several people fall in love with her. She wields vast powers, is directly involved with some kind of cataclysmic apocalyptic events, and becomes a hero of legend, who is, at one point, interviewed by a lorist, and yet these books do not suck. The main character does not come across as an overpowered self-insert for wish fulfillment on the author's part. The thing is, though, is that we know that this character was actually created as wish fulfillment on the part of the author. So Jemisin has said that she wanted to write a story about somebody she doesn't see represented in science fiction and fantasy as a hero, and that's a chubby middle-aged black woman. And she's 100% right, that's not really a thing you see very often in fantasy, like characters like that who are the hero, or characters like that at all. Essun, aka Cyanite, aka Demaya, who is the same character at different ages. That's kind of the reveal at the end of the first book, but when I started reading the book, I just kind of assumed that was the case, because the author doesn't try to hide it. She doesn't make it that unclear that what you have is a non-linear narrative that's describing the same person at different stages of their life. When the focus is on Demaya, who is the protagonist as a little girl, one of the chapters is titled like Demaya in Years Past. So you know this is not happening in the present tense of the book. Oh, speaking of the tense of the book, actually, we should talk about that. So these books are written in a way that some people might not find very, accessible. The books are written in the second person, in the present tense. I don't know how common this is for books that aren't written in English, but a lot of people who read books written in English seem to have a real problem with things written in the present tense. I never have. The first time I ever read a book like that, and that was A.A. Atanasios' The Dragon and the Unicorn, I was fucking blown away. I was like, what? This is a fucking thing? Holy shit, I didn't know! You know, in grade school creative writing classes, they would mention that most stories take place in the third person, meaning the language is he, she, they did this thing, so it's the third person in the past tense. but sometimes books could be written, I did this, I did that, but still in the past tense. And we were specifically told never consider writing in the second person, which is addressed to you. And I was always like, oh, it's the dangerous secret forbidden technique. As a result, things that are written in a more experimental fashion in English, I love stuff like that. I can't get enough of it. You could write a story in the second person future plural, and I would eat that shit up. That would be pretty difficult to sustain for a novel, I think. Although, I don't know, hit me with recommendations in the comments if you know any books like that. I will definitely try them out. These books are written in the second person, and that could be kind of difficult for some people, although once you get into it, into the flow of the story, which happens pretty quickly, then it's easy enough. It also helps that the books start off with a literal bang, more on that in a second, and the pacing picks up so that you just sort of ease into it, and it's very clear that the narrator of the story is relating this information to someone, so it's not just told in the second person for no seeming reason. It's mostly in the present tense, there's a little bit of past tense in it, and as I mentioned previously, it is a non-linear narrative. So in the first book, you have the same character, but 3 different versions of her under 3 different names. So as a little girl, her name is Demaya, and she goes to magic school. As a young woman, she is Cyanite, a name that she took as part of the formal process of being in magic school and being acknowledged as a higher level wielder of magic. And then later in life, when she's middle-aged, she goes by Essun. The majority of the narrative in the present tense is her as Essun. Moistening! I'm so excited to talk about these books that I've gotten way ahead of myself. In terms of the language, the prose, it's absolutely beautiful. And it's very, very well suited to the stories. I love the present tense. It makes things feel much more real and immediate. And there's so many big things that happen in these books. If you enjoy really big, dramatic, literally world-shaking events combined with flawlessly executed, very real characters, then this is definitely your jam. I don't know anybody who doesn't like that kind of story, but whatever. God, these books are so goddamn good. Talked about the prose. Let's talk about the world building, because this is what I can probably talk the most about without giving spoilers away, because this is all stuff that you could read about in the blurb on the back of the book. The stories take place on a continent, on a planet, and that continent is called the Stillness, and this is a very ironically given name. This is a very seismically unstable planet. There are constant earthquakes, volcanoes exploding out of fucking nowhere to just ruin your whole day. Whenever something like this happens, it kicks off an extended winter because of all the ash in the atmosphere blocking out the sun, and these are referred to as a 5th season, hence the title of the first book. The whole world has had to adapt to living with the potential of an apocalypse right around the corner. Like, at any given time, this could happen. They have what's called stone lore, which is all the necessary advice for how to survive a 5th season, and not just on the individual level, but also for communities. Everything in the characters' lives is structured around the potential of a 5th season. The first book opens with one of the most powerful magic-using characters in the story kicking off a new 5th season in the most spectacular way. This dude literally rips the continent in half. From what you're reading, it seems like this is driven by revenge. You will learn so much about that, and you'd expect that he would be the villain of the story, but that's not the case. The book begins with the end of the world for the last time. The thing is that while communities can survive even 25 years, that's how prepared people are, ripping the continent in half and creating all these volcanic eruptions would take hundreds if not thousands of years to recover from this. So you start the book thinking like, this is the apocalypse of all apocalypses. What on earth could possibly fix this? That is the story of all 3 books. One of the coolest things about this world is the feeling that this world is lived in. It's very kind of grim and gritty, but not in the typical like grim, dark kind of way authors like Joe Abercrombie and Scott Backer have popularized. I would not classify these books as grim dark. They're definitely post-apocalyptic or mid-apocalyptic. The Stillness is a world that has survived many, many, many little apocalypses, and yet humanity has managed to keep going, which is pretty freaking impressive. But the devotion to survival at all costs has caused some serious problems. So let's talk about the magic, which actually isn't referred to as magic most of the time. There are some people in this world who are born with the ability ability to summon and control heat, thermal energy, and kinetic energy as well. It's a lot like the 90s X-Men cartoon. Actually, the way I would sum up the 5th season, the first book in the series, is the 90s X-Men cartoon meets Toni Morrison's Beloved. I love both of those things. It must be a really accurate descriptor because I was telling somebody about this at a convention, and a dude walking by, I had no idea who this person was, like stopped and was like, "Are you talking about the 5th season?" I'm like, "Why, yes I am, sir." And he was like, "You know, that's very accurate. I would also say it's about a mother trying to do right by her kids in every possible way she can," and that's also a really accurate descriptor of what these books are about. They are also about the horrors of oppression and slavery and what it can do, the horrible ways that it can mess people up, how trauma can echo throughout different generations. But there's also a very powerful message of hope, this idea that if justice is done, then groups of people who've lived on either side of a very, very deep segregational divide can live together and work together in united communities. So good. We have the kind of mutants, origins is what they are called. Orogeny is actually a real word, not a made-up word for a fantasy story, and it means how mountains are born, how they arise from interactions of plate tectonics. I just think that's so cool that the author took that and ran with it. An orogene is someone who has the power, literally, to make mountains. It's a genetic thing. It's definitely passed from parent to child. Unfortunately, orogeny can manifest when you're very young. If you don't have someone to teach you how to use it, you can inadvertently kill people with it, which happens to a lot of young orogenes in very tragic ways. Usually what happens is they get hurt or injured or roughhousing with other kids, and they end up sucking all the heat energy out of, say, their best friend or one of their parents, and it just freezes them. Or they might do it to an even larger area. They might like suck all of the life out of a whole community of people just as an instinctual response to fear or pain or even things happening under the earth that they can perceive. Orogeny is a thing that has to be hidden away, or somebody called a guardian has to show up and they take you to a special school called the Fulcrum. The Fulcrum is where orogenes are trained and licensed, and this is the only way they are allowed to legally exist. They become imperial orogenes, but otherwise they are not people. One of my favorite things in this book, and this reminds me a lot of Frank Herbert's Dune, and I think he may have been one of the first people to do it, is there's little quotes from historical sources from within the book, so like little stories within stories, oftentimes at the end or the beginning of each chapter. One of them is a bit of law, like from a council in the Old Empire that established the laws that orogenes are not people. They might kind of look like people and they might kind of act like people, but they're not actually people, and they cannot be allowed to be people for the safety of everyone involved, was the decision that was made. So imperial orogenes are slaves. Now, if you do everything right, if you learn magic the way that you're supposed to do and wield it for the sake of the Empire, because of course in a tectonically unstable planet, having orogenes around to quell a volcanic eruption or messy plate tectonics and things like that is really, really useful and has actually saved millions of lives. But you're not allowed to wield that power for yourself. You can only do it in the service of the Empire, and only in the ways that they tell you. It's very, very X-Men-like in that way, and I mean that as a good thing. I fucking love the 90s X-Men cartoon. The Empire and the Fulcrum is kind of like the Republic of Free Genosha, if you remember that plot arc. So what happens in flashback is that Demaya, the little girl, is revealed to be an orogene, and her family rejects her, and then this dude named Shafa comes and takes her away to the Fulcrum. Now, Shafa is a guardian, and I don't want to spoil too much, but the Guardian Order is real weird and fucked up, and they're basically in charge of, well, protecting young orogenes from being destroyed by angry mobs, on one hand, but also in charge of destroying orogenes that won't submit to imperial control. Every orogene has a guardian. The guardians all purport to love their charges, and you can see how the potential for abuse in this is, in this scenario is very high. And Shafa is a very special guardian. I won't get much further than that, but he's really neat. So little little Demaya goes to magic school, has to deal with bullying, eventually learns enough magic to kind of be independent, and meets a guy named Alabaster, who is one of the most powerful characters in the book. At this point in the story, she's going by Cyanite. Cyanite is assigned to Alabaster. Again, I don't want to spoil too much of the plot, but oh man, does shit get dark. So I guess, content warning, some really fucked up shit happens in these books. Jemison, as an author, is so good at giving her characters just a little taste of happiness and then yanking it all away and just stabbing you in the heart. One of the biggest themes in this book is justice, and it's like, unless justice can be done, there can be no real happiness in the world. Especially not for Origins, who are cruelly mistreated, whether it's being rejected by their families or being enslaved by an empire that says they are not allowed personhood. Many things happen. She ends up escaping Imperial control for a little while, and that is when the story begins. She is going by the name Essun. She has a husband and 2 kids. Her husband is named GJ, and she has 2 kids. Nasun is her daughter, who's the oldest, and then her little boy Uche. The story kicks off not just with the end of the world, ripping the continent apart. It also ends for her in a pretty spectacular way, and I'm not gonna describe it. It's, shit is dark. If you are the mother of small children, I don't know if I can recommend this book to you without you prepping yourself for bad shit happening. She has to set out on a quest to help her children. This is happening during the big real end of the world. Eventually, it's not just her quest to save her children, it's also the quest to fix the world forever, both in the sense of trying to fix the unstable plate tectonics to put an end to 5th seasons, but also to destroy society in a lot of ways, because you kind of have to break everything apart and burn it all down to forge a new society where people that aren't Origins and Origins can live together in harmony. So another content warning, a lot of discussion of like child abuse and what intergenerational trauma can lead to. Like, a lot of child abusers think that you're doing it for the good of your children. Like, this is something you have to do to them so they will survive in the world. But there's always a better option. That's another one of the themes of these books, is that there's always a better way. It just may be a lot harder, and you may be so beaten down by your circumstances that you can't see that there's a better way. Or the better way is gonna come at a very high cost to society. You may literally have to tear everything down and start all over again. So a lot of really dark, horrifying stuff happens, but a lot of just really cool, like, stuff that makes you go, that's the neatest thing, Especially the magic system. You learn a lot about orogeny and how it works. If you are a fan of detailed magic systems, you will definitely love these books. Especially magic systems that are more than what they would initially seem to be. And continuing with the world building, one of my favorite things is there's kind of a version of, I guess, what you would call the Gaia hypothesis in these books. The Gaia hypothesis, of course, is the idea that the Earth is alive, is a living being, and kind of an organism unto itself. In the books, people will oftentimes refer to Father Earth, so the Earth is male, and it hates people. Earth is always called evil. It's the evil Earth. There's some lore that Father Earth once had a child, and Origins took that child away. As a result, he has cursed the world with 5th seasons. Oh, that's just, that's just some fun lore. That couldn't be anything real, right? Right? Man, oh gosh. Oh, the things that you will learn as you read these books. Deep lore. I like world building. The problem is that a lot of authors seem to think that a list of battles and some historical figures and shit, that constitutes world building, and making really terrible fake languages full of apostrophes and other nonsense constitutes world building. It doesn't. As you can tell, I feel very passionately about that. But the world building in this book is mystery world building a lot of the time, which I love. I love it when the world is really ancient and full of secrets and lore and things that you have to discover, and the author does let you discover them as the books go on, and it's just so neat. It's very hard for me not to spoil this stuff because, oh my god. At the beginning of the 2nd book, you find out about Father Earth's lost child. Oh man, it's so cool. It was just one of those, like, this is the coolest moment in fiction. I hope I haven't given the impression that these books are just nothing but deep, weighty, ponderous reflections on trauma, and it's not. It's all that and an extremely action-packed, really great, epic fantasy. That, I would say, is my absolute favorite thing about these books, the way they take classical fantasy tropes, the hero of legend whose quest is to save the world, and make it feel so new and fresh and wonderful. That largely happens through the amazing world building, but also the characters. There are a lot of them, as par for the course in a fantasy novel. They're all so freaking wonderful. You either really love or really hate them, sometimes both. They can be very, very complex and yet incredibly relatable. Let's talk about the Mary Sue idea, right? That in some ways she's a character for wish fulfillment, and you know, as per the author, she kind of is a character designed for wish fulfillment. But the wishes are the thing that matters most when we're talking about wish fulfillment in fiction. It's not that wish fulfillment is bad, it's that sometimes the wishes are bad. And if the wishes are things made by your 13-year-old masturbatory self, well, then your book is probably going to suck. Killer Chronicles. But if these are wishes made by an adult to see themselves represented in fiction, well, a different perspective is never a bad thing. There's reams and reams and reams of wank fodder for teenage boys, but the idea that the hero of legend is a chubby middle-aged black woman is pretty great. It feels new and exciting and different. And it helps that Essun is so complicated. She is not remotely a Mary Sue. She has actual flaws that get her into serious trouble. Not ridiculous flaws like Bella Swan being, you know, I'm so clumsy, giggle giggle. Not stupid, useless flaws, actual character flaws. Essun, because of her past trauma, is really slow to trust. She keeps a lot of secrets. She can be very prickly and hard to deal with, and I just love her. I love her so much. The characters in these books are great, and you understand why they are the way that they are. Part of the way the characters are done so right is you have this non-linear form of storytelling where you get to see everything in flashback that builds the characters into their present state, and so you completely understand their motivations and you can relate to them. Going a little crazy today with the eyeshadow. So I haven't done a fun eyeshadow look in a long time, but it's officially spring, even if outside my house there's 6 fresh inches of snow that were dropped out of the heavens last night, but whatever. It's spring, goddammit! Much like these books, I'm trying to celebrate life, even in the middle of an apocalypse. There's a race of beings called stone eaters that look like statues, and they're very, very important. On one hand, they're inhuman and kind of monstrous. On the other hand, they are some of the coolest, most well-developed characters in the books, although that kind of applies to basically every character in the books. All of them are well-developed. I can't think of a single character that isn't extremely well-developed, even if they're only in there for a short period of time. All of the mysterious things in the book will come to make sense. There's some cool stuff you find out about in the 3rd book that is hinted at in the beginning of the 1st book. So good! The story is also about one of Essun's children, Nassun, and her parallel quest to, I guess let's say save the world in her own particular way. Blend that a little bit. The plot of these books, even though you're describing it, well, it's a non-linear narrative told in the 2nd person and the present tense, it might sound kind of intimidating, but the plot is a fairly standard quest narrative. Save the world, find your kids, that kind of thing. If you've read George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire books, you probably would like this. It's funny that Jemison is like, I don't get why people recommend my books if you liked his books, because I don't do any court politicking. I can't stand that kind of stuff. But I would say it's less the court politicking and more the ancient world steeped in lore that has periodic natural disasters that lead to extended winters. And the idea that whatever is going on in the world is, you know, this big spooky mystery. Maybe it's possible for the characters to fix this and sort of heal whatever damage was done to the world. And finding out what caused that damage is probably going to be a very, very important part of the narrative in Martin's books. I sure hope so. That's a great thing about the Broken Earth books, is that they're finished. They're actually freaking done. How great is that? I don't think she has any plans to write any more stories in the world, although I would definitely read them if she did. Laying down a little springtime flush. I decided that I wanted to review these books because, one, she has another book out. It literally just came out, so like a couple of days ago, so I haven't had a chance to get my hands on it. But also because we as the world are going through some shit right now, and some might think it's a little bit apocalyptic. One of my favorite things about these books, I've said that a lot in the same ways that with my review of the Kingkiller Chronicles. I was like, one of the worst things about these books over and over again, because they're so bad. Well, there are so many best things about these books, is the idea that there's always hope, even in the middle of an apocalypse. And the only way to accomplish anything under those circumstances, no matter how hard it is, just keep moving forward and see what happens. Hold on for one more day. Continents will move your way. Obviously, we're not dealing with that right now, although what with the locust swarms on top of the plague, a river in Toronto being stained red with blood, I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of horrible earth-shaking catastrophe actually happened. Hopefully I didn't just bring that into existence. Ah, fuck. Eyebrows. I'm pretty fucking proud of myself for being able to talk this much about these books and how freaking good they are without giving away any of the gigantic spoilers. Do you guys want to talk more about that? Should I have another video that's just nothing but spoilers for the purposes of nerd-outery? I'd do it, because I just love talking about these books. They're a lot of fun. I need Gudetama for this. Each one of these 3 books won the Hugo, as I've mentioned before. That's a big deal. I'm pretty sure this is a historical first. I should mention the context under which that happened. At the time these books were being written and published, there was some serious shit going on in the science fiction community. Specifically, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, the organization that holds the Hugos and that kind of thing, was going through some big upheavals in terms of its leadership. Science fiction writers, for the most part, except for maybe some military sci-fi types, like to consider themselves pretty progressive people, working towards the enlightenment of humankind, sending us to the stars, or helping realize our own heroic qualities through the power of myth. But as it turns out, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America organization was full of really nasty racist assholes. And a lot of this came to a head when one of them, a loathsome man-baby who calls himself Vox Day, a middle-aged dude who literally refers to himself as the Supreme Dark Lord of the Internet, that should tell you a lot, was running for president of the organization. 10% of people voted for him, and when I say that this dude is a racist misogynist, I mean he's like, almost like a caricature. The one good thing about Vox Day is that he's a terrible writer. Unlike with Lovecraft, none of his works are ever going to be considered influential. All of his work is published through his own vanity press that he owns in Italy, where he fled to avoid paying taxes in the United States. Imagine the worst Lord of the Rings fanfiction you've ever read, but put in hyper-Christian proselytizing of the last battle in the Chronicles of Narnia, crank the awfulness up to 11. That's the best thing I can say about any of his works. But because he's such a terrible writer, we don't actually have to worry about separating the art from the artist, because his art is as worthless as his opinions. I'm not gonna repeat any of the horrible things that he's said. They're too vile, but all you have to do is look this stuff up and you'll find it. In the midst of this, here's a bunch of people, mostly white people, who think of themselves as very progressive, having to be confronted with the idea that if you're so progressive, why is your organization so full of racists? 10% of people voted for this loser. That's way more than there should have been. It should have been him voting for himself and no one else. And then, when he said something so vile that the organization couldn't ignore it anymore, and they booted him out, he started a campaign with a couple of conservative types called the Sad Puppies and the Rabid Puppies. Their whole thing was nominating works for the Hugos that were ostensibly in line with classic science fiction ideas, and none of this, snowflake progressive stuff that was apparently ruining science fiction, according to them. It was a really awful time. You got to see a lot of people's true colors, but ultimately, the Sad Puppies and the Rabid Puppies were defeated. Their attempts to fuck with the Hugo's process were shut down. The organization made new rules so that kind of shit couldn't happen again, and in the midst of all of this, the Broken Earth books won Hugo for Best Novel 3 years in a row. They're just so freaking good. For the Sad and Rabid Puppies, to have that just shoved down their throats was one of the best things ever. It was just a victory for all that is good in the world. So, do I recommend them? Obviously. I don't even really have any nitpicks for these books. There is not a single thing that I would change. I guess warning, if you're in the mood for something super lighthearted, obviously these books are not gonna be it. There's a lot of character death. There's a lot of really heartbreaking stuff. The author does not pull her punches. Jemison makes you care about these characters and then puts them through absolute hell. Kind of literally in one instance, but I won't spoil that. The ending to these books is so satisfying. I don't want to say any more than that, but endings are hard. A lot of authors write really good books and then completely fuck up the ending, Stephen King, but not here. The ending is perfect. It ends in exactly the right way. The ending is just as good as the rest of the books. Okay. So here is my springtime look. I hope you like it. If you haven't read the Broken Earth books, give them a chance and go seek them out and read them, as well as Jemison's new book, which I believe is called The City We Became. I'm definitely going to be picking it up. Expect a review on that in the future. Even in these tough times, just remember, there's always hope. There's always a better way of doing things, even in the middle of the world ending. Until then, bye y'all!